In the 50 years following the World Fair, Tesla's alternating current spread like wildfire throughout America and the rest of the world, setting the foundation for modern-day life. His light display was the start of a now $200 billion industry. That industry had its humble beginnings in the homes of average Americans. We're on our way to speak with a woman who experienced this growth firsthand.
My name's Bernice Kuntz Weinheimer. My married name is Weinheimer. I was born in Kuntz. I lived in Blumenthal, Texas, and that's also where I was born. What was news like?
News, yes.
There was very little, except what the neighbors brought to you. And you did have a telephone, which was hooked up to a telephone line, a party line, so you got the local area news on the telephone. But as far as state or national news, there wasn't anything unless you were fortunate enough to have a battery radio. And you'd get a few news. Not all the folks in our area had a radio to begin with. Only way you got water was with a windmill. At first there was hand-dug wells, but I was lucky enough to miss that era, pretty much so, but most people had a windmill, and the wind drove the windmill and you got your water out of the ground with that. And from there it was pumped into a storage tank or straight to the cattle trough or whatever, wherever you needed it. Wood stoves. Wood stoves were for heating, for cooking, for ironing, for heating water, for everything you needed. You get up in the mornings, you rush to the stove and bring your clothes along and stand by the stove to get dressed if it was a cold morning.
First you had to build a fire.
But you had to build a fire before you could do anything. You had to cut some wood, had to haul wood, bring it to the stove. Then you usually tried to have a little bit of a fire going with embers during the night, so you could just throw extra wood on it in the mornings and have a little bit of a start on getting a fire going.
Okay.
The stove was used for, like I say, heating water and for cooking your food, baking, ironing. Had these little doozy irons. You put them on the stove. That part gets heated. This is the handle you put on it. You're ready to iron. This happens to be my little play iron that I could iron with. The others were bigger. It was certainly a lot easier after you had electricity. You didn't have to haul your wood. You could just turn on a switch. You could have a light. You didn't have to fill the kerosene lamp and clean the shade on it. So it definitely was a lot easier. And what have you. But it was certainly a lot easier after you had electricity. You didn't have to haul your wood. You could just turn on a switch. You could have a light. You didn't have to fill the kerosene lamp and clean the shade on it. So it definitely was a lot easier.
Okay, what was your first experience with electricity?
I don't really remember. It was probably the light bulb. Everybody had the lights, so everybody stand around, wait for the light bulb to go on. And there was no real fixtures to the lights to begin with. You were happy if you had your globe and you had light.
When did electricity become a common commodity in your area?
Well, it was fairly late. Now people like Pawpaw had electricity in Stonewall because they had a little battery-powered cell plant someplace in Stonewall.
DC plant.
A what?
DC.
DC, okay. Someone had fixed a plant with a lot of batteries, and they could all hook up their electricity to these batteries. So there weren't that many houses in Stonewall, but so they got their electricity from these batteries. So that was much earlier. And as far as where I lived, which was about 5 miles further down the road, we had electricity between 1939 and 40, somewhere in through that area. And at that time, it was called Pedernales Electric Company, which later became Central Texas.
How old were you at that time?
Oh, probably about 7, 10, something like that, depending on, I don't know the exact, I don't remember the exact date.
How quickly did life transition from being without to this today?
Depending on how much money you had. But, you know, they'd get the most important appliances first. You might get an iron, because like I showed you, that was kind of a hard thing to iron. And you'd probably get a refrigerator pretty quick, because before that you just had an ice box with a block of ice in it to keep things cool,
Where'd you get the ice from?
which had to be hauled in from Fredericksburg, so it was not an easy thing. So the refrigerator was a lifesaver for keeping food fresh and healthy.
Yeah.
I was just going to tell you about you asked about the windmill, but the windmill had, to service the house, it had to pump the water up into a tank which was elevated above another house, which we call the tank house. And that became pressure to run your water into the house. Because if it would have come straight from the windmill, you would have had no pressure. You'd have just had it trickle.
And you only had water when it wind blew.
So having it higher gave it the pressure to come into your house. And we had one faucet into the house to begin with. That was it. And of course there were no bathrooms, because you had no running water, no way to get anything going in there. You had to heat your water on the stove in order to get water to take your bath. And of course the electric water pumps came in real handy too at that point, because if you had no wind, you had no water. So therefore, now you could have electric pump on your on your well, and could have water without waiting for the wind to come along, or without having a storage tank. And then there was the thing of washing machines. You know, ladies long ago had to do a washboard washing kind of thing, and then when some folks had a washing machine with an electric motor on it,
Gas motor.
gas motor that you could use. And of course, that was kind of, you still had to heat your water and put it in your washing machine. But goodness, when you got the electric washer and dryer, that was pure heaven. You didn't have to go haul water, you didn't have to go hang clothes on the line, and it was an amazing change. But like I say, where I lived out in the country, people didn't have all those conveniences right away. They were happy to have the stove and the iron and maybe a radio. Before that, we just had the battery radios. Refrigerator, just the basics is what they strived for first. And it was many years before they got around to the rest of it, and especially TV came much later. You wouldn't know what it was like without TV.
Bernice is right. Before this interview, I couldn't have imagined a world without electricity. It gave me a new perspective on how lucky we are today. I'd like to thank her for her time and her memories.